So I was lucky. I grew up in the best of times. I became of age right after the Holocaust, after America's victory in the Second World War. I lived in a community of Holocaust survivors, and I was born in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, and I moved to Borough Park, which was not a Hasidic community at the time. It was a modern Orthodox community. We had one or two Hasidic families, but very, very mostly modern Orthodox Jews. We would wear a baseball cap instead of a kippah. We would not wear our tzitzit out. We would wear them in. And we didn't have to pay us or other outside manifestations of being Jewish, except we always had our head covered. And of course, we ate only kosher. And I went to good yeshivas. I went to Yeshiva Eitz Chaim in Borough Park. And then my grandparents founded the Torah Vodaas Yeshiva in Williamsburg, and also the first Young Israel. So I have some good yichus when it comes to a family that started things, and my family also started a free loan society in Williamsburg. And I was a bandit. I was not a good student. In high school, I was in what was called the garbage class, where mostly they put disciplinary people. And I had, today you would call it attention deficit disorder, but in those days, my grandmother just called it shpilkus. I had it still. And when I graduated high school, my principal, a very Orthodox rabbi, called me in and said, Dershowitz, you got a good mouth on you, but a Yiddish cup you don't have. So you should figure something out that you do with your mouth, but not with your brain. He said, I have two suggestions. One, you could be a conservative rabbi. You don't have to use your brain for that. Or you could be a lawyer. And I wasn't smart enough to be a rabbi, so I became a lawyer. And then suddenly everything changed. From being a C- student, in fact, I'll never forget a grade I got in Hebrew, Bein Oni minus. I didn't even make it to mediocrity. Bein Oni means mediocre. I was mediocre minus. I had something to aspire to. So from being almost last in my class in high school, I quickly was first in my class in Brooklyn College, first in my class in Yale Law School. I never got a B in my life. My mother always said, get B's. C's are a shanda. A's, you'll become a teacher. That's no good. I want you to be a businessman. So get B's. I never got a B in my life. C's in high school, A's in college and law school. And then I, went on to be a law clerk in the Supreme Court. And then I got my professorship at a very young age. And I remained a professor at Harvard for 50 years. I taught 10,000 students. And I've now been retired for 6 or 7, but I haven't had a moment of retirement. I've been fighting against the forces of evil, fighting against anti-Semitism, fighting against anti-Zionism, fighting against false accusations against me, and I've been fighting. So retirement does not seem to be in my future.
There's a beautiful midrash that says when Jacob returned to Israel from Haran, he wanted to settle down, Vayeshev. And Rashi says, Kafta olav ruksa shel Yosef, the entire debacle of Joseph and the fiasco of sibling rivalry broke out precisely then. Because the righteous, when they want to settle down and retire, so to speak, in this world, they're told from heaven, this world is a world of action, of fighting, of struggle. The next world is a world of retirement, so to speak. You were quoted.
If there's a next world, I don't want to retire. My friend Larry King died. My friend Larry King died the other day. I was interviewed by him probably 25, 30, 40 times. And I am convinced that he's already arranging an interview with Hashem, with Moses, with Abraham, with David.
Right.
He's getting it all set. People like us, we don't find retirement easily. I mean, I love being with my family. I love taking walks on the beach, but I'm always thinking, I'm always active. I always am trying to undo an injustice, and there are so many injustices in the world, and I get called on every single one of them. And I work very closely with Aleph, which is the most wonderful Chabad organization, which believes that the greatest mitzvah is Pidyon Shivuim. And I, through Aleph, have helped release many, many, many Jews and even some others from prison. Aleph is now working on behalf of an old man who's 80 years old, who was not Jewish, but who was unjustly convicted. So I work very closely with Tzvi Bayarsky, with various other rabbis who founded Aleph over the years. Chabad is just an unbelievable organization. What the Rebbe did to turn Jewish activism into something so positive. the Rebbe and I had a conversation once during the Soviet Jewry movement. He thought I was being too aggressive and being too confrontational, and he thought the better way was to work behind the scenes. And we had a meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I think we agreed that my working more actively may have helped him behind the scenes, and him working behind the scenes certainly helped me in my activism. So, there's roles for activism and there's roles for quiet diplomacy behind the scenes. And the Rebbe was a master of both.
And it brings me to a very interesting story. Without going into too much detail, there was the chassid of the Rebbe who was closely involved with a high-profile figure, up until a point where the high-profile figure broke away from a particular policy the Rebbe was advocating for Jewish identity and law. And when this chassid reported back to the Rebbe said, "What's doing with your relationship with that individual?" He says, "I broke ties." The Rebbe said, "Why?" He said, "Because he disagrees vehemently on this particular issue, which is fundamental." The Rebbe said, "While we may not agree on one mitzvah, we surely can agree and work on the other 612 together."
Yeah.
What an important idea of highlighting common ground.
I had a similar experience with the Rebbe. So one year for his maybe 75th or 80th birthday, I can't remember exactly, they were going to be honoring him in Washington. And the guest of honor was a senator named Jesse Helms, who was a racist senator from Mississippi. And so I wrote a very polite letter to the Rebbe saying, "You know how much I respect you, but I'm just curious, why are you doing this, honoring a man who has not complied with the rules of civility and equality?" And he wrote back and said, in Chabad, we honor looking to the future as much as to the past. And he also repeated, he does many good things, although he does bad things. We don't focus on the bad, we focus on the good. He said, but he's about to become chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I want you to look and watch him over the next few years. And this man turned into such a staunch pro-Israel person that, of course, I wrote back to the Rebbe saying, "I'll never question your judgment again." You're absolutely right to give him an award, and look at the influence it had on his future conduct toward the nation state of the Jewish people.
I actually included that very powerful story in a book I wrote recently called Positivity Bias, all about the Rebbe's positive thinking, in a chapter called The Process of Illumination, Not Elimination. And I brought many examples of a similar theme. I want to go back a little bit to something you said in a Forbes interview. You said at the time that getting a Supreme Court clerkship was probably your second big break. Your first big break was at age 14 or 15, when a camp counselor told you were smart, but that your mind operated a little differently. Well, he was certainly right about that in the best of ways, and how. Can you share a little more about the background of that period or that particular conversation? Because I find it very moving, and I find that it might inspire our audience as well.
It inspires me. I tell students all the time, we have multiple intelligences. There's no single way of thinking and being smart. And I was not a good student. And I went to a camp, a Jewish camp, ironically named Camp Eton. Can you imagine? In my day, people like me, born to Jewish families, my parents gave us very, very waspy names. I mean, Alan, my kids are Elon, but our parents. So the Jewish camps were named, Eton. I went to a camp named Lebanon, another camp named Maple Lake. So in Camp Eton, I was a superstar because I was a good athlete and I was a good actor, and I was popular, I was funny, so I was popular in camp. But in school, I wasn't so good. And the dramatics counselor in the camp was a young man, just a few years older than me, named Irving Greenberg. You may know him, Greenberg, who's a great rabbi, but at the time he was just a college student. And he cast me in a play. It was, remember it was 70 years ago. But he cast me in a play called Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand. And I did well in the play. And he came over to me and said, "Avi," my name was Avi growing up. I got Alan later. He said, "Avi, people tell me you're not so smart in school, but I have to tell you, you're very, very smart. You have a different way of thinking about things. Don't let anybody ever tell you you're not smart." And that stuck with me. And it really inspired me because my parents didn't think I was very smart. When they gave IQ tests early on in my elementary school, we had a system of ABC classes. The A students were the best, the B students. I was in the C class. And they gave an IQ test, the early IQ test, and I got the highest IQ in the school. The first thing, the principal thought I cheated. Nobody's ever been accused before of cheating on an IQ test. But so they gave it to me again, and I ended up with a very high IQ. So they put me from the C class to the A class. My mother went and complained. She said, he can't compete with Jerry Blau and Arthur Edelman and all the people in the A class. So they compromised and put me in the B class. But my parents didn't think I was very smart. But Yitz Greenberg spotted something, and I've always been enormously appreciative of him for having done that.
That's powerful. You know, Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory shared a number of occasions that one of the most powerful moments with the Rebbe was when he realized the Rebbe believed in him more than he believed in himself. And he said, that transformed my paradigm. And I think this is amazingly inspirational for people out there. It takes one kind word, one gentle word of affirmation and constructive building up that can really change a person's self-image and trajectory.
I wish there were more Rabbi Sachses. I wish Rabbi Sachs had lived to 120. He was the ideal rabbi. He was just wonderful. We became friends. I got to know him. I also knew his cousin, the psychologist. An amazing, amazing family. But the rabbi and his family and everything, they did so much, not only for British Jewry, but for world Jewry. He was so highly respected. He was one of these people who could bring everybody together, secular Jews, religious Jews, Haredi Jews, Reform Jews. For him, everybody deserved a fair hearing, and he was such a brilliant intellectual. I remember when he was named chief rabbi, there was some criticism. He wasn't a pulpit rabbi. He was more of an academic rabbi. He had a pulpit, but that wasn't what he was well known for. And he became, and insisted on being rabbi, sir, not sir. So,
like the king and the Rebbe, a little bit.
Yeah. He was a truly, truly great man, and his memory will be with us forever.
Sure. Some years back, I was a chazan in Encino, Chabad, and a man in a hoodie attended morning and evening services on Yom Kippur. His Hebrew name was Shapsai Zissel Zimmerman. He's otherwise known to the world as Bob Dylan. And what's interesting is that Zimmerman means a man of song. What's interesting as well is your name, Dershowitz, comes from the word doresh, which means to inquire, seek out, and it seems linked to your destiny and calling as well. And I'm wondering whether there's a story behind your family name.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you that Bob Dylan's camp counselor, when he was still Zimmerman, was my cousin Tzvi Dershowitz, because he was at Camp Ramah for a summer, and my cousin Tzvi was his group leader, a counselor, I don't remember which. Tzvi is the rabbi, now retired, at one of the large synagogues in Los Angeles. And, Bob Dylan, another Jewish Nobel Prize winner. We're used to getting Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry, but in literature for music, that was the first of a kind. Although I also think Leonard Cohen probably should have shared it with him. Two of my favorite singers, but my name probably does come from Darshon, Doresh. We don't know for sure. It also, a Doresh is in Polish, I think, a hardworking horse. So who knows what the name really comes from, but I'm happy to be a hardworking somebody who does Midrash. So I'll tell you a funny story about that. So I wrote a book called The Genesis of Justice, which is my amateurish Midrash on Bereshit. And I showed it to my uncle, my father's only remaining brother. My father was one of 8. And my uncle, Zachariah, who was born Zachariah Dershowitz, he made Aliyah, so he's now Zachariah Dershav. He's a very eminent rabbi and lives in Jerusalem. So I was in Israel when I wrote my book, The Genesis of Justice, and I showed it to him. And he read it, and he said, it's a very smart book. It's a very good book, but it's a little apikorista at a few places where I do some challenges that may be inappropriate. He said, could you change one word in the book? I said, for you, Uncle Zachy, of course. What word would you like me to change? He said, Dershowitz on the cover. I said, that word I won't change. So you're going to have to live Dershowitz on a book about Bereshit, but it's my attempt at a midrash, kind of a legal midrash, on the most wonderful stories of Bereshit. I start by saying, if I were on a desert island and I had one FedEx box and I can only get one book to teach my students who are with me on the desert island, that one book would be Bereshit. You could teach philosophy, you could teach astronomy, you can teach science, you can teach literature, you can teach ethics, you can teach anything from the book of Bereshit. And you can't understand the law of Shemot. You can't understand even the Aseret Dibrot unless you see the human beings in Bereshit struggling without law, struggling without Aseret Dibrot to try to do justice. And if you look at each of the Aseret Dibrot, they all relate to a story in Bereshit. Obviously, false witness relates to the story of Yosef and Potiphar's wife, and all the stories of murder obviously relate to Cain and Abel, and others, and don't steal. There's so many that you can't understand the statutory law without understanding the developing common law in the book of Bereshit. So that's, of all my 45 books, I think that probably stands out as my favorite nonfiction work.
That's fascinating, really interesting. You talked about the name. The Hebrew word for Shemo, his name, is actually the same numerical value as story, his story.
Wow.
And another interesting thing is that actually the two middle letters of the word neshama is Shem. One's name very much reflects one's inner soul properties and destiny. I'm actually working, Professor Dershowitz, on a book myself called The People of the Word, 50 words and how they shape Jewish thinking. I'm analyzing how 50 Hebrew words convey the Jewish perspective, the specifically uniquely Jewish perspective on various different themes.
Oh, that sounds like a great book. I mean, I used to give my students the following assignment. I used to teach freshmen at Harvard, freshman seminar, 18-year-old kids, and I would explore with them moral issues and scientific issues and just try to introduce them to ways of thinking. And I remember one essay I asked them to do was on the Adon Olam. I gave them two phrases from Adon Olam, B'terem kol, and V'acharei kechlot hakol. That is, before anything and after everything. And I asked them to describe what it's like before anything and after anything. How do you describe nothingness? And, it really made them think, because human beings simply are not capable of understanding or thinking about what came before. We don't know what came before. We have no idea. There's a midrash that says, why is the first letter of Bereshit a bet? Bet is enclosed on three sides, because we'll never understand up, heaven. We'll never understand down. We'll never understand what came before. We should focus on the opening of the bet, which moves forward. That we can understand, perhaps.
That's beautiful. I have to say, it does sound like you could have become a rabbi yourself, Professor.
I wasn't smart enough. No, my principal was right. I wasn't smart enough to become a rabbi. I had to become a lawyer.
Let's jump into more of your professional life for a few moments. My first question is, how has your being Jewish influenced your legal thinking, your legal sensibilities and approach?
In every possible way. First, growing up in the post-Holocaust world made me committed to human rights and to always defending the underdog and the downtrodden, and always making sure that our liberties are preserved. So that's easy. But then my Jewish education, the Talmud is the only religious book in early history that, instead of burning dissenters or throwing them out of the church or the religion, we honored them. We honored dissenters. We resolved conflicts in the Talmud sometimes with teku. No, we're not sure. One can be right, the other can be right. So for me as a dissenter, and as I used to use what students called the Socratic method. It wasn't the Socratic method, it was the Talmudic method. Socrates developed it, the Talmud had it as well. So in my class, there was never such a thing as a right answer. Every answer begot another question, which begot another question. So very much my Jewish education, very much my being Jewish, influenced every aspect of my life. When I would assign students reading, in addition to signing Blackstone, I would give them a parak from the Sadhugaon or from Rambam or from Rashi, not usually Rashi, because Rashi's answers tend to be short. I wanted longer. But remember, Jews have been thinking about legal issues for how many thousands of years? Blackstone's only 300 years, but we've been thinking in the Talmud about these issues. And I don't think I ever came across a problem in teaching at Harvard Law School for 50 years, a question that wasn't posed in some form by the Jewish sages. I don't necessarily always agree with every answer, but the questions were always there. One year I taught a course on probabilities in the law with a mathematics professor. Both of us had some Talmudic background. And so we used probability problems from the Talmud. You find a dead body and it's halfway between one city or another. And, you have somebody who's in a city and the bad guys want to bring him out, and all of those questions were raised in the Talmud. All these great moral questions raised in the Mishnah, raised in the Talmud, raised in the responsa. And the responsa is, after all, the common law. What is responsa? It's questions put to great rabbis. And I gave my students to read in my courses the responsa of Rav Oshri. He did a book of responsa on the Shoah. Amazing book. Questions that arose during the most critical period of Jewish history, most damaging period in Jewish history. And he's doing shilas and chuvas and giving great answers. And so that was another way of introducing my students to the common law. So the long answer to a short question is my Jewish background has had complete and total influence. I would not be what I am today without having been brought up Jewishly with the background that I had.
It's very interesting because one of the words and entries in the book I'm working on is the word Rav. People sometimes who aren't Jewish, when I introduce myself as a rabbi, say, "Oh, you mean a Jewish priest?" And I say, no, actually not at all, because a rabbi literally comes from the word Rav, which means teacher. I'm a teacher. Right. But the fact is that the word Rav, according to some commentaries, comes from the word Riv, which means conflict, because the role and the job of a teacher is to create cognitive conflict, is not to engender a certain, acceptance or blind, acceptance, but critical thinking. Not teaching students what to think, but how to think. And in fact, as you know, when you enter the yeshiva, it's called Milchamta Shel Torah, the war of Torah. There's very rigorous debate, and that's something I think you embody and our world needs much more of today.
Well, I wish more teachers would teach their students how to think rather than what to think. Today in universities, many classes have become propaganda mills. Teachers telling students how to interpret the Constitution to come out the way they want it to come out, how to interpret the law, how to interpret history. My philosophy was always teach the students how to think, let them think for themselves. I'm not so much interested in their answers. I'm interested in the processes by which they come to their answers. I would tell my students, if you parrot me in class, that's good, you get a C. That's an average grade. If you parrot me, you get a C. But if you can show that you're thinking in ways that are creative, that's what gets you the A. And, that's true of Talmudic thinking as well. I mentioned my uncle Zachariah, my uncle Zaki. He has been doing a daf yomi every day with his first cousin, my other relative, Rabbi Mendel. They've been doing a daf yomi every day since they're 13 years old. They're now both 95 years old. And they have never stopped learning. Rabbi Mendel and my uncle Rabbi Dershowitz learn together every day. Rabbi Fendel's son runs the yeshiva in Sderot, where I was there for Purim one year, and rockets came right near us as we were reading the Megillah. It's fascinating. And for my uncle, 95, and he's still sharp as heck. He had his 95th birthday, and we had a family Zoom. And about halfway through the Zoom, a special guest appeared, namely the Prime Minister of Israel, wishing my uncle a happy birthday. Of course, I arranged it. Bibi is a friend of mine who I've known for more than 40 years, and another great leader of the Jewish people.
It's really interesting. Isidore Rabi, who won a Nobel Prize for physics, was once asked, who was his greatest inspiration? He said, unbeknownst to her was my mother. And when asked to explain, he said, all other students, when they came home from school, their parents asked them, what did you learn today? My mother asked me, Izzy, did you ask a good question? Right, so it's very multicultural.
Yeah. Look, we're very lucky. We are surviving the pandemic. Other friends of mine did not. We're surviving it, living on Martha's Vineyard. We also have the greatest neighbor in the world, Alejandro Weinstein, who is our neighbor and been very generous in allowing us to use his home to have my children come and be able to isolate. And we're so blessed to have this place on the vineyard where we have a minyan in our house on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You talked about being a chazan. Both of my grandfathers were chazanim, and I sang in the choir both of Beryl Chagi and of Moshe Kusevitsky. And I still love on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. I become a shtickle chazan. So I love chazanish music. I listen to chazanish music all the time. If my voice were better, I'd be a chazan, but I wasn't good enough to be a chazan or a rabbi, so I had to become a lawyer.
Let me ask you, what was the most difficult case you've ever worked on?
Okay, the most difficult was Natan Sharansky because he was thrown in prison. The keys were thrown away. They were trying to starve him to death. They didn't want him to survive. And we put together a team headed by my dear friend, the former Minister of Justice of Canada, Erwin Cutler, and we went to the Soviet Union. We fought hard for Natan, and finally, after diplomacy, economic pressure, political pressure, legal pressure, we got him out in time for him to be the father of two wonderful daughters, now a grandfather. So that was probably my toughest case. The case that got me the most criticism, of course, was defending President Trump. I defended him on the floor of the Senate. My family members stopped talking to me. Friends stopped talking to me. It's easy to isolate on Martha's Vineyard because nobody wants to talk to me. They think I'm a Trump supporter. I don't take positions on politics like that. I supported his views on the Middle East. I didn't support his views on immigration, but I believe that he should not have been impeached and that it was unconstitutional. And so I defended him. And that's what caused the big pushback of any case I've ever had. But that's not going to make me change my views. I still believe and would defend. I defend people who were charged with crime. I recently helped get pardons and commutations. People, some of whom weren't such great people necessarily. But my job is pidyon shivuim. That is the greatest mitzvah, and I'm going to keep doing that. And if I can help people get out of prison and reunite them with their families, I'm going to try to keep doing that. I know it will make me enemies because people love me when I defend certain people, but they hate people who are charged with crime.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned that you see your mission in part as pidyon shivuyim, as redeeming those who are in captivity, meaning in prison. Do you ever worry about their release and what they might do in the future? How do you live with that? How do you carry that? Is that an anxiety that's part of your deliberation?
It's very difficult. It cuts both ways. Not so long ago, I saved two boys from being executed who were innocent. Their father was guilty of the crime, but they were innocent. I didn't sleep at night when I thought they might be executed for something they didn't do. On the other hand, I represented O.J. Simpson, and he went and did something again. Not something terribly serious, but he tried to regain some of his mementos, and he ended up going to jail. I think he's the only defendant I've ever defended who was convicted of doing something again. So I've been very fortunate. I've probably had, 250, 300 clients over the years, and I've won a great many of them and charged for additional offenses. So I've been very lucky. It would be very difficult for me, but it would be the same. You could ask the same question to a doctor. If a doctor helps cure a criminal and the criminal goes out and does something terrible, how does he feel about it? Or a rabbi or a priest or a minister gives forgiveness to somebody, and then that person goes out and does terrible things. We all have our very important jobs to do, and a criminal justice system depends on zealous advocacy, and I can't pick and choose. Generally, I don't know if a person is guilty or innocent when I begin to defend them. Sometimes I find out, sometimes I don't find out. I still don't know in many cases whether the person was guilty or innocent, even after I won his case.
If you find out in mid-case that someone is guilty, does that alter your passion? Does it alter your consideration of the case? How do you handle that? It must be a difficult dilemma.
It's a great question. It alters my strategy. I won't allow a guilty defendant to take the stand. I won't allow them to lie on the stand. It's not my job to put on a false defense. I will only put on a truthful defense. But, like the Rebbe said with the 613, I've never met a defendant who didn't have some redeeming qualities. And I know their families are hurting and their families are suffering. And I try very hard, or maybe they've been overcharged. I'll give you an example of a case that I helped to get a pardon on recently. Two men were offered 5 to 10 years in prison if they pleaded guilty. They didn't believe they were guilty, so they went to trial. They were convicted. I wasn't their lawyer at the time. They were convicted. And instead of giving 5 to 10 years, they got 75 years and 85 years in prison. And I helped persuade the president that that was unjust. That was a trial penalty, a penalty for going to trial. And he commuted the 2 sentences, 2 Jewish guys. And so I'm very proud of that. And when I spoke to them on the phone, I made them promise me, you will make me proud. You will make the president proud. You will live a good life. And you will devote some of your life and charity to Pidyon Shivurim of other people. And they agreed to do that. And I'm sure that they will carry that out because they're so appreciative. They thought they would never see freedom again. And suddenly they're told they can go home to their family. It was a great feeling, a very positive feeling. But being a criminal lawyer, you lose cases. You have cases of innocent people going to jail, guilty people going free. It's a complex moral dilemma. But I think almost all interesting professions have complex moral dilemmas. Look, today with COVID, we have dilemmas: who we give the COVID to, who has priorities, and things of that kind. These are all complicated moral issues, which I love teaching about when I was teaching at Harvard.
It's interesting that you mentioned what you did, because we have a biblical source for that. When it comes to Yishmael, the son of Hagar, when they were in a desert with no water, and God performed a miracle for them and revealed a well, the prosecuting angels turned to God and say, well, are you want to redeem and save Yishmael, who was known to have had violent tendencies, etc., and would one day come to persecute the Jewish people? And the answer was, Ba'asher hu sham. We evaluate him for who he is today. Let me ask you a tough question, perhaps. You've defended many controversial individuals over the decades, some accused of heinous crimes like murder, like sex trafficking. Can I ask whether there's anyone you wouldn't defend? Say Hitler, may his name be erased, Yamar Shmo, or Bin Laden. And is there a line that you draw in your own practice, in your own, when you evaluate the cases you take on?
Yeah, I have several criteria. I don't represent people who are in the business of committing crimes, who are in organized crime or terrorists, who I know if I get them acquitted, they'll go out and do it again. So I would not represent Bin Laden or obviously Hitler if he were in the middle of the Holocaust, or anybody else. Also, I don't represent people who are fugitives, who are trying to escape justice. I don't represent people who would lie on the witness stand. But beyond that, people are accused of serious crime. The more serious the crime, the more they need a good defense attorney. I think of myself as a good defense attorney, the way a brain surgeon would think of himself or herself as a good surgeon. They take the toughest cases. I take the toughest cases. So I have moral qualms. I don't like some of my clients. Some of my clients have treated me very badly. But, you never know. Mike Tyson, for example, was the nicest guy, nicest client. When he was in prison, I was his appellate lawyer. He would stand up for an hour on the phone to get on the phone to call me. And after an hour, he'd finally get me. And I would talk to him, and he'd hear my little daughter crying in the background. And he would say, "Oh, Alan, I'm going to get off the phone now. I hear your daughter needs, I'll get back on the line. I'll call you in an hour." I mean, people don't see that. On the other hand, I've had clients like Leona Helmsley, who was so impossible, just so difficult. If I had to do over again, I wouldn't have taken that case, even though she might very well have been innocent of the charges that she was convicted of. She was just a very mean person, and mean to other people, and mean in public, and mean to me. I'll tell you a funny story about her. Okay, you'll love this story. So I was representing her, and my daughter was born. And so she sent a private jet with a chauffeur-driven Cadillac car to deliver a 6-foot-tall bear, stuffed bear, to my daughter, which my daughter loved. And about 3 years later, she calls me on the phone. I'm still defending her. She said, "How does your daughter like the bear?" I said, "Oh, she loves the bear. Thank you. It's a wonderful bear." She said, "Yeah, I stole it from Donald Trump." I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I sold him my restaurant called Rumpelmeyer's, which had all the stuffed animals as decorations, and the animals came with it. But when your daughter was born, I snuck in at night and I stole the bear and I sent it to your daughter." And I said, "I can't keep a bear that's stolen. I'm going to send it back to Donald Trump. It's his bear." He wasn't obviously president yet. This was years before. And so I called him on the phone and I told him the story. And he said, "Oh, we knew she stole the bear. We didn't know she stole it for you. Just keep the bear. Tell your daughter it's from Uncle Donald." So I told my daughter she had a bear from Uncle Donald. I have to tell you, my daughter is not a Donald Trump fan. So she doesn't play with that bear anymore.
That's a funny story. We actually hosted Rabbi Shem Tov from Washington, D.C. some months ago.
Wonderful. Yeah.
He's wonderful. What I loved about him was he's so apolitical, and he, like you in a way, he says the shul is a safe space. You park your politics outside the door. But he shared an interesting story where he too receives a lot of pushback from anti-Trumpers. And in one instance, they challenged him because there was a picture of him shaking Trump's hand, and one of his friends tells him, "Listen, I understand you have to shake his hand, but you were doing it with a lot of passion, too much passion." So he says, "If you knew what the president told me when I was shaking his hand, you would smile. You wouldn't be so upset." He said, "What?" He said, "President Trump asked me, are my grandchildren behaving in the synagogue?"
So one of the last times I saw Rabbi Shem Tov was in President Biden's sukkah. So here's the story. When President Biden was Vice President Biden, they decided to have a sukkah because, as you know, President Biden has Jewish machatonim and Jewish grandchildren. Apparently today, everybody has Jewish grandchildren. As I wrote in one of my books, everybody wants to marry a Jew except apparently another Jew. And we have to see what we can do about that. But
right.
So Biden has Jewish grandchildren and a Jewish machatonim. And so he had a sukkah. Of course, the sukkah was catered by Rabbi Shem Tov. And I made Kiddush in the sukkah and gave a little speech. Joe Biden is very, very supportive of Jews, Jewish values. I think he'll be supportive of Israel. The top 3 people in his cabinet are Jewish: the Secretary of State, the Secretary Attorney General, the Secretary of the Treasury. His chief of staff is Jewish. I hope he doesn't go back to the Iran deal, except with major, major changes. But I think he surrounded himself with good people. I'm a liberal Democrat. People forget that because they saw me defending Trump on the floor of the Senate. They figure I was a Republican or a supporter of Trump. I was not a political supporter of Trump. I was a political supporter of Hillary Clinton. And I've known Joe Biden for 40 or more years. And I'm looking forward to him hopefully trying to bring the country together. But Rabbi Shem Tov does a great job in uniting Republicans and Democrats around Jewish issues.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. It's a personal question. I'm not sure if you're comfortable answering, but looking back on your career, do you have any regrets about any of the cases or
Sure.
clients you took on or didn't take on?
Oh, yeah. No, I regret ever having met Jeffrey Epstein because as a result of meeting Jeffrey Epstein, I was falsely accused of having sex with somebody I never met. Fortunately, she has a series of emails in which she admits she never met me, a tape recording by her lawyer in which he admits that she was wrong, simply wrong, statements to her best friend that she never heard, she never met me. So it's clear beyond any possible dispute that I never could have met this woman or had any contact with her. But still, I was accused. The 92nd Street Y canceled me. They wouldn't allow me to speak about Israel in defense of Israel because of this false accusation. They said, we know it's false, but we don't want trouble. Another high school in New York, a Jewish high school in New York, the same thing. The Temple Emmanuel in New York. So I've been canceled. It's been harder for me to defend Israel on college campuses. That's understandable. But for Jewish venues, like the 92nd Street Y and Temple Emmanuel and this Jewish high school in New York to cancel me because of what they know is a totally false and made up accusation. That's been painful. So I wish I had never laid eyes on Jeffrey Epstein. I was introduced to him by the Lady Rothschild, a very eminent person, saying he was this great contributor to Harvard, and he's friends with the president of Harvard. The Hillel building was donated by Jeffrey Epstein to Harvard. So everybody thought he was an Ehrlicher Mensch, and turned out not quite. So I wish I had never met him, but I will fight back against these accusations and conclusively prove they're false.
Which brings me to a very important question that I struggle with a little bit. You know, there was a politician in the States, I forget who. There were allegations against him. He was eventually vindicated after 5 years of very difficult and arduous legal.
Said, where do I go back to get my reputation?
That's right. My question. And I want to ask you, Professor Dershowitz, I was thinking that here the Torah has a model, has an example of something that perhaps we can consider incorporating into modern society or law. And that is the idea of Eidei Zimum, which is the Torah says that if witnesses make up something about someone else for which there's a certain punishment, if it's proven false, they receive that particular penalty.
And I quote that in my book. I have a book that's out. I recommend people can read it. You can get it for free on Kindle. It's called Guilt by Accusation, and it's the story of the false accusation against me. And it ends with the quote from the Torah and the Talmud, and saying, in fact, I say, why does the Torah say tzedek tzedek tirdof? My own bar mitzvah, shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. I still remember my bar mitzvah. So why does it say tzedek tzedek? Because there has to be tzedek not only for the person who is a victim, but there has to be tzedek also for the person who's been falsely, for Joseph when he was falsely accused. And I'm demanding justice, and I'm demanding that the woman and the lawyers who knowingly falsely accused me get the same punishment I would have rightfully deserved had I done what they said I did, except that, of course, I never did, and I never had improper sex with anybody in my life. And so, I'm going to be completely vindicated, but the false accusers shouldn't get away with it. And I want to see the Torah principles and the principles of the Talmud followed in American secular law. I agree with you.
Because it is a shanda, I think, that anyone could literally get up and say things about others which, once vindicated, have no bearing on the person who makes such claims. There is defamation, of course, but it's very complicated to prove all those, malicious, etc. Ariel Sharon famously sued the Times, and he didn't receive a monetary reward because it was impossible to prove that there was anything malicious, even though they did.
I'm not looking for a monetary reward. I'm just looking for I'm looking for the government to prosecute the false accusers and put them in jail. I mean, this is a woman who sat there and said, I am now going to make a false accusation. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a confusion. She said, I'm going to line my pocket with money. She's made over $1 million so far on accusing other people. She's not going to get a penny from me, but I want to see her go to prison. She made a willful, deliberate decision, having been represented by the lawyer, having told the FBI that she never met me, having told reporters that she never met me. She then decided to make up the story for money, and she ought to go to prison as a result of it. And I will not rest until justice has been done to me as a victim of a false accusation. Victims should be heard and listened to, whether they're victims of sexual assault or victims of false accusations of sexual assault. So I'm going to continue to fight for my reputation, but I recognize I'll never get it back completely. I'll never get another honorary degree from a college. I got like 15 of them before this. I'll never be invited to speak at graduation from a college. I spoke at maybe 25 graduations from college. Just the accusation. That's why I named my book Guilt by Accusation. Just the accusation is enough to take you off a pedestal that maybe you deserve to be on for your lifelong accomplishments and knock you down. And it's now happening to other people as well. So, we'll wait and
I
see.
think
Look,
this is
well,
this is especially relevant in today's cancel culture. So many prominent individuals, intellectuals, academics have been very quickly and easily, brought down in many cases.
Some of them rightfully, but we have to have a process for distinguishing between who is rightfully accused and who not. In my book, I propose the establishment of a Me Too court of former judges and justices where people who have been falsely accused can bring their case. When I was falsely accused, the first thing I did is I went to Harvard and said, please investigate me. Then I went to the FBI and said, please investigate me. Then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office and I said, please investigate me. Then I went to the DA's office and I said, please investigate me. I want full and complete investigation because I have nothing to hide. I've done nothing wrong. And she has. But nonetheless, people believe the alleged accuser rather than the person who's been falsely accused. But look, I'm fighting back. They picked on the wrong innocent person. Anybody who knows me, all my friends and family, all know that I'm telling you the truth. And people who know her know that she's lying because they've told me that. I've gotten calls from people. Her best friend, a journalist who interviewed her, all have said she's lying. She's making it up. She's trying to get money. Don't give her a penny. And I won't.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I know that it's not an easy topic to talk about, so I appreciate that.
To talk about it because I have nothing to hide. The lawyer who falsely accused me called me to the office one day with a rabbi and said, we can get you out of this thing. Just get some rich Jewish rabbis to pay $1 million to her and we'll drop it. This in front of a rabbi. Get rich Jewish rabbis to contribute $1 million and we'll drop it. It's just a shakedown plot. And I'm not going to submit. I'm a victim. I want the FBI to investigate everybody. But I'm going to continue to defend Israel. I'm going to continue to defend Jewish values. To anybody who listened to me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to have people in your community listen to me. And if you want to listen to me more, you can listen on my podcast, The Dersh Show. All that's missing from The Dersh Show is the wits. And the wits are provided by my listeners, my viewers, because they ask me the hardest questions. So listen to
Let me ask you, Professor, while you are famous for defending a well-known clients, what's less known about you is that you dedicate more than 50% of your time and cases pro bono. And I want to take a moment to salute you for that. The Torah teaches us that we're obligated to allocate 10% called ma'aser of our earnings to those in need. Our sages actually teach one should give up to 20%, but it seems like you don't give chomesh but 50% of your time to those who afford representation.
It's now 60%, and I do it mostly through Aleph.
Wow.
I'm on the phone with Aleph so often. I mean, the head guy that I speak to, Tzvi Bayorsky, never sleeps because he lives in California. I don't know when he ever sleeps. And he's always trying to help people. And of course, they don't charge anybody. I don't charge anybody. And I want to continue to do my pro bono work. I do more pro bono work, I think, than any private lawyer in the United States. And yet people, criticize me because they don't like who I do my pro bono work for. And I don't always succeed. I called the President of the United States about a month ago, and I tried very hard to get him to commute the death sentence of a person on death row. And he wouldn't do it, and the person was executed. But I tried my best, and that was a pro bono case. I did it with Kenneth Starr, who's on the opposite side politically. We both tried to persuade the president to give the commutation, but he wouldn't do it. So you don't always succeed. I fortunately succeeded.
It's a tremendous example, I think, especially for younger people.
I really want to do it.
I said that's a tremendous example, especially for younger people out there who are trying to establish themselves professionally. And I think the question of how much to give back, to what degree, and how to allocate one's priorities, focus, and time is a very important thing. Professor, do we have another 10 or 15 minutes?
Yeah. Well, you can start small, do 10%, but then as you get more accomplished and wealthier, give more and more and more. And so I'm in a position now where I can do 60% of my time on free cases and free causes, and I'm going to continue doing that. If I live long enough, I'll get to 100%.
You've become known as one of the most high-profile advocates for Israel. In your view, what has Israel and the wider Jewish community gotten wrong when it comes to making the case for Israel? What still can be done to change the narrative?
Well, I I think we have to be showing the positive case for Israel. What I have urged is every single Friday at every American and European and every university in the world, every Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning, the pro-Israel groups hand out a one-page flyer, both sides of the page, beautifully done in color. What has Israel done for you this week? What has Israel accomplished that has made your life better? Stay away from the Israel-Palestine conflict. Stay away from the Abraham Accords for now. Get to medicine, get to science, get to technology, get to music, we've been watching a lot of TV series at night from Israel. We just saw one, Mekimi Me'afar Dal, a wonderful Israeli show. Of course, we saw Fauda. So what has Israel done for you this week? No country in the history of the world has ever given more to humanity in 72 years of existence than Israel has. No country in the world, you may remember this, I debated in the Oxford Union against BDS. And the reason I won the debate was not that I was a better debater, is that I went into the audience and challenged them at Oxford Union, where they started BDS. I said, name a single country in the world today faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel, that has a better record of human rights, a higher compliance with the rule of law, more concerned with enemy civilians. Nobody could name a country. And so we have to make the more affirmative case for Israel. And we have to be willing, when Israel does something wrong, we have to be willing to be critical. It's fair to debate, for example. It's a fair debate what Israel's priority should be on the virus and on the vaccines, as to whether its own citizens should get the second shot before Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza get the first shot. That's a fair debate. I'm not even sure I know the answer to it, but I can see both sides of that question. And don't hesitate about debating issues relating to Israel, as long as you defend Israel's basic right not only to exist, but to thrive. Israel's going to become a more important country now because of the Abraham Accords. And people say all the time, who deserves credit for the Abraham Accords? Some say it was Donald Trump. Some say it was Benjamin Netanyahu. The answer to me is the Israeli people. They have made their technology and their alliances so invaluable, so important, that every country in the Middle East now wants to be Israel's ally. The United Arab Emirates, soon Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco. Everybody wants to be in alliance with Israel because Israel can help them enormously, economically, scientifically, and in every other way. So it's Israel that deserves the credit for the Abraham Accords, although Trump and Netanyahu and Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz and David Friedman all deserve enormous credit and should get the Nobel Peace Prize for the work they did in promoting the Abraham Accords. But I doubt they will because of the unpopularity that Trump has in the international community.
That's a great answer. It's through the affirmative retelling of the story. And what does Israel do for you? Let me ask you, you spent a lot of time fighting anti-Semitism and its prejudice and its bigotry. In a few words, can you share your blueprint for how to fight and eradicate anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, yesterday or the day before, the head of the United Nations, the Secretary General of the United Nations, made a wonderful speech about the spread of anti-Semitism around the world. He did it in my synagogue, the Park East Synagogue, with Rabbi Schneier and Chazan Helfgott. And everybody should go online and look at the Secretary General's speech about the growth of anti-Semitism. And we have to fight back. We have to have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. And that's difficult because you get an organization like Black Lives Matter, they're doing a lot of good, but they claim in their platform that Israel has engaged in genocide and in apartheid. And we can't let them get away with that. The Reverend Warnock, who just became the senator from Georgia, he may do good things, but we can't let him off the hook for having lied and said we saw Israeli soldiers shooting down our brothers and sisters, unarmed Palestinians, like birds of prey. That was a blood libel. And we have to hold people responsible for everything they've said. But look, the best cure for anti-Semitism is Jews. Meet Jews and you're not going to be anti-Semitic. Meet Chabad, you're going to love Jews. Go to Israel and you're going to love Israel. So we have to be more out there, more visible, and provide good examples for why being Jewish is a positive value. But we have a fight on our hands because we're seeing increased racism, increased bigotry, increased anti-Semitism, and we have to make sure that we fight back. We're in a good position to fight back because we're strong. And never, ever forget what the Psalm says, what the Tehillim say. Hashem oz li amo yitain. Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. God will first give the Jewish people strength. Only then will we get peace. We need peace through strength. So be strong. Don't be weak. Don't apologize. Don't be unwilling to show your strength. Use your strength, your economic strength, your moral strength, your political strength, your academic strength. Use it in the interest of defending Jewish values and defending Israel. Don't ever be embarrassed that we are strong. We weren't strong during the Shoah, and we paid an incalculably high price. We need to be strong. We need to be stronger than our enemies. We need to be stronger. And remember Elie Wiesel's phrase, too. He said the lesson for him of the Shoah was always believe the threats of your enemies more than the promises of your friends. So no matter how many promises the United States makes to prevent Iran from destroying Israel, believe Iran and don't necessarily believe the United States. Develop your own ability, Israel, to prevent Iran from ever becoming a nuclear arsenal state. And the same thing is true with anti-Semitism. Depend on your own strength, build your own strength, and make sure you fight back with every ounce of strength against every form of bigotry, including anti-Semitism.
That's really beautiful. You remind me of a medrash. The question was asked when Moshe struck down the Egyptian, what did he use to kill the Egyptian? And there's a three-way debate. One answer is the Shem HaMeforesh, the name of Hashem. One answer is a shovel, and the other is a fist. And there's a beautiful interpretation that says we have to take a three-pronged approach to anti-Semitism. We need the shovel. We need to build alliances. We need to build buildings and institutions. The fist is we need to arm ourselves in whichever way, the Iron Dome, etc. And we need the name of Hashem, as it were. We need to strengthen our own sense of Jewish identity and tradition. As the Rebbe would say, the way to fight anti-Semitism is through pro-Semitism. I have one more question for you, Professor.
Sure.
How would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as a man of principle, who fought for my principles in an uncompromising way, who never deviated from principles, who didn't let criticism deter him from doing the right thing. My kids have said that on my tombstone, it's going to say, never boring. I think I've never been boring, but I'd rather be remembered as a person of principle who's never been boring. So I'm going to continue to not be boring and continue to fight for my principles, even though often my principles are misunderstood or used negatively against me. But I'm very proud of having stuck to my principles. That means defending President Clinton and defending President Trump. It means defending good guys and bad guys. It means doing the right thing and standing by your principles. It means passing the shoe on the other foot test. Would I do the same thing if the shoe were on the other foot? And, you know, I've learned that. I've learned that from my Jewish education, from my Jewish heritage, and from the fact that if you compromise on liberty for any people, you'll compromise on liberty for many. Remember the great theologian who was killed during the Second World War, the Protestant theologian who said, you know, when they came for the Jews, I was silent because I wasn't Jewish. When they came for the communists, I was silent because I wasn't a communist, on and on. Then when they came for me, there was no one left to speak up. And so we're all in this together, and we have to fight every form of bigotry, but never, ever, im ein ani li mili. Remember that. If I am not for myself, be with me. And if I'm not for myself alone, what am I? And im lo achshav, im ein achshav, eimatei. If not now.
Wow.
When.
Are there ever days when it feels too difficult? And where do you draw inspiration from then?
I never find it too difficult because I know the stakes are very high. Sometimes I'm frustrated. I get angry. Fortunately, I don't get depressed. I have a good psychological and attitude. I fight back, but I get mad. I get bad when they try to take it out on my family, and they do. And when they try to take it out on my people, and they do. But the answer is to fight back, and I will always do that. I will never give up. I will never stop fighting back. Thank God that Hashem gave me Oz, and if He gives me Oz for more years, I will use that Oz in the interests of shalom. So that to me is my inspiration.
Let me conclude by saying the Rebbe once blessed someone who was 80 years old, and he said Moshe began his career at age 80. Professor Dershowitz, I want to bless you to use the next decades upon decades of years of life, not just defending. Hopefully we will get past the defense and into the expansion and articulation of everything you hold dear. I do believe, from my humble opinion and limited understanding, that the characteristic that best defines you, again, who am I to say, but is integrity, is the sense of sticking to one's principles regardless of how popular they are, regardless of how acceptable they are and how accepted you will be or not based on those views. And I think that's a deeply Jewish value, and in the greatest tradition of Avraham Ha'ivri, the Hebrew, who was willing to stand apart from the world because of his deep commitment to the values of justice, of compassion, and of human decency. I can't thank you enough for the time, for the energy, and for your poignant and thought-provoking responses. And I'd like to extend an invitation to you for a better time ahead after COVID. Whenever you come to London, our community will be really privileged to host you in person, please God. Warmest and best wishes for a very successful decades to come, please God, with the same degree of alacrity and proliferation and Bezrat Hashem from strength to strength.
Well, thank you so much, and I will accept your invitation. I look forward to sharing a Shabbat meal with you at the Chabad.
Thank you so much.
Take care.